My name is Stella. I am 33 years old. I spent my 20s locked inside a sterile research laboratory, trying to find a cure for the rare autoimmune disease destroying my former husband. I poured every ounce of my energy into saving his life, while my family mocked me for being a poor scientist. But the day the ink dried on our divorce papers, he threw me away to start a new life with his wealthy young mistress. He thought he had won. A few days later, when he strutted into his clinic for his life-saving infusion, his doctor quietly looked at him and said that from now on, his former wife would no longer be involved in his treatment. The doctor demanded his card back. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a harsh lesson to those who took your sacrifices for granted. The hostility hit me the second I walked into the dining room of the house belonging to my parents. This was not a family dinner. This was an ambush. I had barely taken my seat when my mother Susan slammed a thick stack of documents onto my plate right over my untouched appetizer. "Sign the property release, Stella," she demanded, her voice echoing enough for the waitstaff to hear. "Give up the house. Sienna cannot stand the stench of a failed marriage lingering in her marital home. And we agree it is time you stop dragging Liam down." I looked across the table. Liam sat there looking healthy, his arm wrapped tightly around Sienna Astor. Sienna was 25, the arrogant heir to a massive real estate fortune, and she made sure everyone in the room knew it. She rested her hand on the white tablecloth, deliberately flashing a diamond engagement ring the size of a grape. It caught the light from the crystal chandelier overhead, practically blinding everyone at the table. My father, Thomas, raised his champagne glass toward the happy couple, completely ignoring my presence. "You really should thank Sienna," Stella, Liam said with a condescending smirk. He leaned back in his expensive tailored suit, crossing his arms. "She paid off my entire hospital debt last month with a single swipe of her black card. You have officially been rendered useless to me. I do not need a broke lab rat anymore. I have a real partner now, someone who actually knows how to live in the real world instead of hiding behind a microscope." Sienna giggled, tossing her styled blonde hair over her shoulder. "Do not be too hard on her, babe," she purred, her voice dripping with fake pity. "It must be difficult for her to accept that she could never provide for you the way my family can. We just want a clean break. Just sign the deed over to us, take whatever meager savings you have, and move into a small apartment. It is the least you can do after holding him back for so long." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "Do the right thing for once, Stella. Your sister Rachel and her husband Andre never caused this kind of embarrassing drama. Just sign the papers and leave." I did not cry. I did not scream or beg for their approval. I simply reached into my purse, pulled out my favorite pen, and flipped to the last page of the property release. I signed my name with a smooth, deliberate flourish and slid the heavy stack of papers across the long dining table. Liam snatched the documents eagerly, his eyes lighting up with unbridled greed. "Enjoy the house," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I picked up my phone, unlocked the screen, and dialed a number. I placed the phone on the center of the table and turned on the speaker. The crisp voice of a bank representative answered immediately. "Hello, this is Vanguard Financial. How can I help you today?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "This is Stella. I am calling to officially revoke my status as the primary guarantor on the Seattle property located on Mercer Island. The divorce is finalized and the property has been fully transferred to my former husband, Liam." "Understood," the representative said, keys clacking loudly in the background. "Guarantee status revoked. We will immediately transfer the burden of the $500,000 second mortgage solely to the new primary owner." The color instantly drained from the face of Liam. He dropped his fork. Sienna stopped smiling, her gaze snapping toward Liam in absolute confusion. "Second mortgage?" Sienna demanded, her voice losing all its sweet, breathy charm. "What second mortgage?" I picked up my glass of wine, swirling the liquid slowly before taking a sip. "Liam did not tell you," I asked, feigning surprise. "That massive diamond ring you are wearing right now was not bought with Astor family money. Liam took out a $500,000 second mortgage on our shared home to purchase it. Since I just signed away my rights to the property, the debt is yours now. Congratulations on your engagement, Sienna. I hope you enjoy paying off your own ring for the next 30 years. Liam slammed his hands on the table, knocking over his glass. You vindictive witch! He snarled, his facade shattering. You think this changes anything? I am removing you from my insurance plan tonight. Good luck affording your own basic medical care on a pathetic researcher salary. You will have nothing by tomorrow morning. I looked him dead in the eye, setting my wine glass down on the pristine tablecloth. Cancel the insurance, Liam, I said softly, a genuine smile touching my lips. But before you do, you might want to call your clinic. You should probably check exactly who has been paying the $1 million licensing fees for the experimental autoimmune treatments keeping you alive for the past 5 years. Before Liam could even process what I just said, the heavy mahogany doors of the dining room swung open. My sister Rachel strode in, draped in a ridiculous couture gown that cost more than my first car. Right behind her was her husband, Andre. Andre was a towering, impeccably dressed African-American man who commanded every room he entered. He was a senior partner at a hedge fund, the ultimate trophy son-in-law, who brought Wall Street money into our family. My father, Thomas, immediately stood up, his face breaking into a massive smile he never used on me. Andre, my boy, my father boomed, shaking his hand. I heard the news this morning. Closing that merger was a stroke of absolute genius. You are making this family very proud. Andre offered a smooth smile, adjusting his tailored cuffs. It was just a standard acquisition, Thomas. We saw an undervalued asset and aggressively restructured it. But speaking of undervalued assets, I hear we have a little situation to clean up tonight. Andre turned his sharp gaze toward me. He walked slowly around the dining table, glaring at me like a hawk eyeing a dying field mouse. He stopped right beside Liam and Sienna, placing a supportive hand on the shoulder of my former husband. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a sleek checkbook, and clicked his pen. He scribbled a number, tore out the check, and tossed it onto the table. It landed right next to my wine glass. $50,000, Andre said, his voice dripping with condescension. I did my due diligence on that little biotech laboratory you work for, Stella. I ran the numbers. Your burn rate is catastrophic. Your cash flow is non-existent, and according to my analysts, your company will file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy before the end of the quarter. You are insolvent. I stared at the check, keeping my expression entirely neutral. Andre leaned closer, placing both hands flat on the table, trying to physically intimidate me. Take the severance, Stella, he ordered, using the exact tone he probably used to fire junior analysts. Liam and Sienna want to move on with their lives without any legal friction. You need this money because you are about to be out of a job. Be rational. You are just a lab rat. You play with test tubes while real adults make real money. You cannot fight the Astorwealth, and if you drag out this divorce for alimony, I will personally fund the legal team that buries you. Rachel walked over and wrapped her arm around Andre, looking at me with pure disgust. You should listen to him, Stella. You have always been completely delusional about how the real world works. You spent your entire 20s locked in a sterile, windowless room. You missed every gala, every vacation, and every networking event just to play scientist. And for what? Rachel laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. You isolated yourself for 10 years just to sequence the genetic code of Liam and invent some magical cure for his condition. You threw away your youth trying to be his savior. And look at you now. Now you are 33 and broke while Liam found a woman who actually knows how to enjoy life. You sacrificed everything for a man who was utterly bored by you. Sienna smiled brightly, leaning against Liam. She really is pathetic, is she not? She said, tracing his lapel. Imagine wasting your best years staring at blood samples while your husband looked for a real connection. I actually feel sorry for her. Liam did not even have the decency to look ashamed. He coldly shrugged. I never asked her to do it. She was obsessed with her research. I needed a real wife, not a doctor. I listened to their cruel words, feeling absolute clarity. For a decade, I allowed these people to make me feel small. I endured the insults and blatant disrespect because I loved my husband and wanted to keep him alive. I had accepted the role of the boring, poor scientist because I was too busy building an empire they could not even comprehend. I picked up the $50,000 check. Andre smirked, thinking I had finally submitted to his financial pressure. He crossed his arms, waiting for my gratitude. Instead of folding it respectfully, I gripped the edges tightly and tore the crisp paper directly in half. I placed the torn pieces together and tore them again, letting the expensive confetti flutter down onto my empty dinner plate right next to the signed divorce papers. The smirk vanished from the face of Andre. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice raising. I unlocked my phone quickly. "Andre, your audit is garbage," I said, tapping an icon. "My lab is not facing bankruptcy. We just kept our financial data heavily encrypted." I opened the medical portal, navigating straight to the drug registry. I looked at Liam, who was suddenly staring at my phone with panic in his eyes. "When I started developing your medication, the drug was not approved for public use," I explained. "I kept you alive through a legal loophole called a family compassionate use exemption. It allows a lead researcher to administer an unapproved experimental drug to a direct family member." I firmly pressed my index finger against the glowing screen and deliberately hit the bright red button labeled Revoke. "Since we signed those divorce papers today, you are no longer my family," I said, locking my phone and slipping it back into my purse. "I just canceled your exemption with the Federal Drug Administration. Without my explicit daily authorization, the clinic legally cannot give you another single drop of my highly classified formula. You wanted a clean break, so I am giving you one. Good luck finding your next crucial dose on the black market, Liam, because you are going to need a miracle now." 3 days passed since the dinner party. Liam and Sienna were living in a bubble of stolen luxury, completely ignoring the harsh reality of the strict medical deadline I had set. They spent their Tuesday afternoon lounging at the exclusive Bellevue Country Club, sipping expensive cocktails by the sparkling pool. Sienna was busy showing off her massive diamond ring to her wealthy friends, loudly boasting about how she had saved Liam from his boring, broke former wife. Liam looked the part of the triumphant new fiancé, wearing a designer polo shirt purchased with his fraudulent second mortgage. But the perfect illusion shattered exactly at 3 in the afternoon. Liam tried to stand up from his lounge chair, and his legs simply gave out beneath him. A violent tremor seized his entire body. He collapsed onto the pristine white concrete, gasping for air as his joints locked up. His autoimmune condition, suppressed for 5 years by my proprietary formula, was rebounding with terrifying aggression. Panic erupted around the crowded pool. Sienna screamed loudly for the country club staff to immediately call a private ambulance. They rushed him to the Apex Elite Wellness Clinic, a highly exclusive medical facility in downtown Seattle that only catered to the ultra-rich. This was the same clinic where I had previously coordinated all of his specialized treatments. Sienna burst through the sliding glass doors of the emergency wing, clutching her designer handbag. She marched straight to the reception desk, completely bypassing the waiting room. "My fiancé is Liam," she demanded, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "He is a VIP patient here. He needs his proprietary medical infusion administered immediately. Get your absolute best doctors down here right now." "Do you know exactly who I am? I am an Aster and I demand service." The receptionist nervously typed into the secure computer system before picking up a phone to call the chief of medicine. Exactly 10 minutes later, Dr. Aris stepped out from the heavy double doors of the intensive care unit. He was a highly seasoned physician who knew exactly how my clinical trials operated behind the scenes. He walked over to the reception desk, looking at Sienna with a perfectly neutral expression. He reached into his white coat pocket, pulled out the gold-plated VIP medical card Liam had been using for years, and placed it on the counter. Sienna reached for it, assuming it was a mere formality. Then Dr. Aris swiftly pulled his hand back, sliding the card entirely out of her reach. He looked down at the heiress with absolute professional detachment. "Miss Aster, I am afraid we cannot admit your fiancé," he said, his voice steady and calm. "We have stabilized his immediate vitals, but we cannot administer his usual infusion today, or ever again." Sienna stared at him, her face flushing with indignant rage. "What are you talking about?" she yelled, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the doctor. "He receives his necessary treatment here every single month. We have the money. We can easily pay triple your usual rate. Just give him the drug right now." Dr. Aris slowly shook his head, pushing the deactivated VIP card across the marble counter. "This is not a matter of billing, Miss Aster," he explained calmly. From now on, his former wife will no longer be involved in his treatment. Sienna scoffed loudly, crossing her arms defensively. I do not care about his pathetic ex-wife. I am asking you to just do your actual job. Dr. Eris looked at her with a mixture of pity and extreme annoyance. You really do not understand. We simply do not manufacture the drug here. We merely administered it under a highly restricted federal exemption. 10 minutes ago, our legal department received a formal revocation order. We absolutely cannot administer the drug today because we no longer have legal access to it. Sienna slammed her hands on the counter. She pulled out a black American Express card, slapping it down. Name your price, she screamed with desperation. I am an Astor. My family owns half the real estate in this city. I will buy the entire clinic right now if I have to. I will buy the drug manufacturer. Tell me exactly what it costs. Dr. Eris looked at the credit card and let out a humorless chuckle. He leaned forward, looking directly into the panicked eyes of the heiress. You cannot buy it. Miss Astor, he replied coldly. The drug is not on the market. It cannot be purchased at any pharmacy, and it cannot be acquired by any corporate acquisition. It is a proprietary synthetic compound solely owned by a private patent holder. Sienna gripped the edge of the counter, her arrogant facade finally crumbling as the absolute truth began to dawn on her. Who holds the patent? She whispered softly. Dr. Eris picked up his clipboard and turned to walk back into the medical wing. Stella holds the patent, he said over his shoulder. She owns the formula entirely, and she just legally removed him from the clinical trial. Inside the sterile observation room, Liam lay trembling in his hospital bed. The harsh fluorescent lights beat down on his pale, sweating face. The severe joint pain was already radiating through his spine, a brutal reminder of the aggressive disease he had completely forgotten about while living his glamorous fantasy. He stared at the ceiling, shivering uncontrollably as the horrifying reality finally crashed down upon him. He was definitely going to die a slow, agonizing death without me. The heavy hospital door swung open and Andre marched straight into the room, his phone firmly glued to his ear. He hung up abruptly and glared at Liam. Do not panic, Andre commanded, adjusting his expensive silk tie. She is just a bitter researcher playing childish games. I will personally get my best hedge fund lawyers on this immediately. We will absolutely sue her into total submission before the week is out. The next morning, the sterile quiet of my research facility was shattered. I was sitting at my stainless steel workbench reviewing the final Phase 3 clinical trial data for my proprietary synthetic compound when the heavy reinforced doors of the laboratory flew open. Security protocols were incredibly strict here, but my family had always possessed a terrifying sense of entitlement. My mother, Susan, pushed past a startled junior lab technician, her face streaked with dramatic tears. Right behind her marched my father, Thomas, his face red with fury. Following them were my sister Rachel and her husband Andre. Andre, an imposing African-American man who managed a billion-dollar hedge fund, walked with the aggressive swagger of a man who believed he owned the entire building. My mother practically threw herself against my workbench, knocking over a tray of empty glass vials. Stella, you have to fix this right now, she shrieked, her hands trembling as she grabbed the edge of the table. Sienna just called. The Astor family is completely furious. They are threatening to pull their massive investments out of his firm. They will absolutely bankrupt your father by Friday if you do not turn that medication over to the clinic immediately. You are destroying our entire livelihood over a petty divorce grudge. I calmly closed my locked laptop and looked at my mother with absolute detachment. I did not destroy anything, I replied evenly. I simply stopped providing $1 million medical charity to a man who decided I was no longer worth his time. If the Astor family wants to ruin the business of my father because they cannot buy a drug that is not for sale, that is a risk you accepted when you drank champagne to celebrate his new engagement. Before my mother could continue weeping, Andre stepped forward, inserting himself between me and my parents. He adjusted his custom silk suit jacket, looking down at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. You think you are very smart, Stella, he growled, his deep voice echoing in the clinical space. But you are playing a dangerous game with people who have actual power. I have 3 corporate lawyers on retainer drafting a lawsuit right this second. We are coming after you for intentional infliction of emotional distress. We are going to prove that you are maliciously withholding necessary medical treatment out of sheer spite just to punish a man who no longer loves you. I stood up slowly, sliding my hands into the pockets of my white lab coat. You cannot sue someone for emotional distress because they refuse to give away their own privately owned intellectual property for free, I stated simply. Andre let out a harsh, barking laugh, shaking his head. Do you really believe the law matters when you are up against Astor money and my hedge fund capital? He mocked loudly. We will drag you into fierce litigation for years. We will freeze your meager assets, subpoena every single document in this pathetic little laboratory, and bleed you dry until you are begging to hand over the patent. Take the severance check I offered you at dinner. Reinstate his medical exemption today, or I promise you, I will bury you and this bankrupt facility so deep you will never work in biomedical research again. Rachel chimed in, crossing her arms defensively. You are being completely unreasonable, Stella, she sneered, looking around the pristine lab with visible contempt. You always do this. You isolate yourself, you hoard your little science projects, and you refuse to be a team player. Liam is dying in a hospital bed right now because you are too jealous to let him move on. Give Andre the patent rights before you embarrass yourself in federal court. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of intimidation. Instead, I subtly reached under the edge of my steel workbench and firmly pressed the silent security alarm. I looked directly into the furious eyes of my powerful brother-in-law. Andre, I said, my tone ice cold. You manage a hedge fund, so I assume you understand federal regulations. You just bypassed a secure access point to enter a restricted biomedical research laboratory without clearance. By threatening me to surrender proprietary medical formulas on behalf of the Astor real estate empire, you are officially committing corporate espionage. Furthermore, by loudly discussing the private medical condition of Liam in front of my junior technicians, you are demanding I violate strict federal health privacy laws. Andre scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Do not quote irrelevant regulations to me, you arrogant lab rat. I am talking about raw financial power. You have exactly 24 hours to surrender the formula, or I am initiating a hostile takeover of this entire facility. I have already contacted my aggressive investors. We are going to buy out your debts, acquire a controlling interest in your holding company, and liquidate your management team. By tomorrow afternoon, I will own this building. I will own your research, and I will own you. The heavy laboratory doors swung open again. 4 armed corporate security guards stepped into the room, their hands resting cautiously on their belts. Sir, one of the guards said, looking squarely at Andre, you and your party need to vacate this restricted property immediately, or you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. My parents looked horrified, backing away toward the exit. Rachel grabbed the arm of her husband, suddenly looking extremely nervous. Andre glared at the security team, then turned his furious gaze back to me. He smoothed his tie, trying to maintain his dominant posture. Enjoy your last day as an employee here, Stella. He sneered, stepping backward toward the door. Tomorrow my fund is taking over. I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile that made the blood drain from his face. I leaned forward. You cannot take over a company if you do not know who the primary shareholder is. The heavy laboratory doors closed behind Andre and my family, leaving behind a silence that felt electric. I knew they would not simply walk away. Andre was a man who lived to conquer, and Sienna had the Astor wealth to shield her fragile ego. By the time I arrived at my sleek downtown apartment that evening, my phone was vibrating continuously. They had launched a massive coordinated attack online. Sienna had taken to social media, posting a highly edited, tearful video from the lavish waiting room of the elite wellness clinic. She looked directly into the camera, dabbing at fake tears, painting herself as the helpless fiancée of a dying man. She claimed a bitter, unethical scientist was maliciously withholding life-saving medication out of pure jealousy. Within an hour, my sister Rachel shared the video across her massive lifestyle platform. Rachel added her own commentary, telling her followers that I had always been mentally unstable and obsessed with destroying the happiness of others. My mother chimed in the comment section validating the lies by publicly apologizing for my supposed cruelty. The narrative caught fire instantly. Major news outlets began picking up the story of the greedy biomedical researcher holding a sick man hostage for revenge. They branded me a monster. My inbox flooded with hateful messages from strangers demanding I surrender the patent. They wanted to force me to apologize to break my spirit and make me beg for their forgiveness so they could maintain their perfect public image. But I was not the same quiet, accommodating woman who used to absorb their abuse. I did not record a tearful response defending my character. I did not hire a public relations firm to issue a sanitized corporate statement. I went straight to my laptop. Instead of playing their emotional game, I prepared a raw, unedited, time-stamped security feed to release directly to the press. During the final months of our marriage, when Liam claimed he needed absolute quiet in our home to manage his debilitating symptoms, I had installed a discreet security camera in the family lounge for his own safety. I wanted to monitor him in case he collapsed while I was working late. The footage I pulled from the archives told a completely different story than the tragic romance Sienna was selling to the public. I compiled the video into a simple split-screen presentation. I sent it to every major news outlet, tagged every influencer who had shared the video from Rachel, and posted it directly to my company portal. I titled it, "The Reality of Compassionate Care." I pressed upload and watched the progress bar hit 100%. The files hit the internet like a controlled demolition. There was no narration, no emotional background music, just undeniable high-definition truth. On the left side of the screen, the timestamp showed exactly what I was doing on the night of my wedding anniversary. The laboratory security camera captured me hunched over a microscope in my sterile protective gear. I was running on 48 hours of zero sleep, meticulously analyzing cellular structures to synthesize the exact compound Liam needed to survive the month. The bags under my eyes were dark, my hands trembling slightly from pure physical exhaustion as I poured my entire soul into keeping my husband alive. The footage proved my total dedication to his medical survival. On the right side of the split screen, the timestamp matched perfectly, but the scene was the private family lounge of my own house. The camera captured Liam, looking remarkably healthy and energized. He was not resting or recovering from his severe autoimmune flare-ups. He was passionately hooking up with Sienna Astor on my expensive imported leather sofa. The footage was crisp and utterly damning, capturing every sordid detail of their betrayal. But the most horrifying part of the video happened 5 minutes later. The lounge doors opened and my mother walked into the room. She did not look shocked or outraged to find a strange young woman half-dressed on my sofa with my husband. Instead, Susan carried a silver tray holding 3 crystal glasses and an expensive bottle of vintage champagne. She handed the bottle directly to Liam, patting his cheek affectionately, before raising her own glass to toast his secret affair. My mother actively celebrated the deception while I was miles away trading my physical health to manufacture his cure. The public reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The comment sections on the post from Sienna flipped from sympathy to absolute disgust within minutes. News anchors who had condemned me an hour earlier were now broadcasting the split-screen footage on national television, highlighting the sheer hypocrisy of the Astor heiress and my treacherous family. The internet completely turned on them. Millions of people watched my mother serve champagne to the woman destroying my marriage. Sienna deleted her social media accounts entirely, but the damage was irreversible. My phone rang sharply. The caller identification displayed the name of my powerful brother-in-law. I answered, putting him on speakerphone. "Cute video," Andre sneered, completely unfazed by the public humiliation of his wife and mother-in-law. "You think winning a petty internet argument changes the financial reality? The Astor family does not care about bad press, Stella. We care about assets. You played your little security camera trick, but I just outplayed you on a federal level." I stared at the city skyline outside my window. "What did you do?" "Andre, I just filed an emergency injunction with the Federal Drug Administration," he boasted, his voice dripping with triumphant malice. I am using my hedge fund lawyers to seize your patent under the eminent domain for health crisis clause. I am legally forcing the government to strip you of your ownership so we can manufacture the drug without your permission. I have organized a massive press conference for tomorrow morning to publicly announce the seizure. You are completely finished. See you tomorrow morning. Andre did not waste a single second after hanging up the phone. By the time the sun rose over the Seattle skyline the next morning, he had mobilized the entire public relations department of his hedge fund. He partnered directly with the Astor family media team, pooling their massive financial resources to stage a national spectacle. Sienna, humiliated by the security footage, but fueled by pure spite, rented out the largest grand ballroom at the downtown convention center. They were not just planning a local statement. They were organizing a massive nationally televised press conference. Their strategy was ruthless and highly calculated. Andre drafted press releases claiming my refusal to surrender the patent was no longer a private family dispute, but a direct threat to the national healthcare system. He distributed polished legal memos to prominent journalists arguing that one single rogue biomedical researcher should never possess absolute control over a life-saving synthetic compound. He framed my company as a dangerous monopoly and painted my actions as a public health crisis waiting to happen. The narrative shifted rapidly. Andre used his Wall Street connections to pressure federal regulators, loudly demanding that the government invoke eminent domain to seize my intellectual property for the greater good. Sienna funded endless digital advertisements pushing the same narrative, paying influencers to demand my immediate arrest. They created a perfectly orchestrated corporate scheme designed to firmly crush my reputation and completely force me into absolute submission before the ticking clock officially struck 12 noon today. To legitimize their legal maneuver, Andre needed to prove I was mentally unfit to manage a medical patent. He needed witnesses to testify against my character on a national stage. My parents, Thomas and Susan, eagerly accepted the job. While Andre finalized the press conference details, my parents appeared on the highest-rated morning talk show in the country. I sat in my office watching the live broadcast on my monitor. My mother wore a modest, conservative dress, looking tired and heartbroken. She cried on cue, wiping her eyes with a tissue, as the sympathetic host asked about my behavior. Susan looked directly into the television camera and delivered the exact lines Andre had written for her. Stella has always been deeply unstable, my mother wept, shaking her head tragically. We tried everything to help her over the years, but she isolated herself. She developed this unhealthy obsession with her laboratory work because she was intensely jealous of her older sister, Rachel. Rachel has a beautiful marriage and a successful life, and Stella simply could not handle her own failures. We watched her mind slowly deteriorate. My father jumped in, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. He looked at the host with grave concern. "We are absolutely terrified for Liam," my father stated. "Stella is using his fragile medical condition to punish our entire family. She is holding his life hostage because she is mentally unwell. We support the Astor family taking over the patent because Stella is a profound danger to herself and to the public." The trap was perfectly set. By publicly branding me as an unstable, jealous, and vindictive woman, they were providing Andre with the exact character assassination required to push his federal injunction through the courts. If the public believed I was insane, a judge would gladly strip away my corporate rights and hand my life work over to the Astor real estate empire. The morning talk show hosts ate it up, nodding with grave sympathy and expressing their outrage at my supposed cruelty. The television chyrons running across the bottom of the screen labeled me a rogue scientist and a bitter ex-wife. My parents had sold my sanity for a chance to secure their social climbing future. They genuinely believed they had cornered me. They thought I would be cowering in my apartment drafting a desperate apology letter or frantically begging a defense attorney to keep me out of federal prison. But I was definitely not looking for a criminal defense attorney. I was already doing something entirely different to permanently end their vicious game today, ensuring they would never, ever again have the power to destroy my highly successful independent life. While my family cried for the television cameras, I sat inside a sleek glass boardroom surrounded by top-tier corporate attorneys and banking executives. The table was covered in binding documents. I reached for my pen and began signing my name on the dotted lines. I was not signing medical defense papers to keep my patent. I was signing final merger documents for an initial public offering. I was taking my biotechnology startup public. Andre assured the world my company was completely bankrupt. He truly believed he could crush me because he arrogantly underestimated my dedication. He never realized the years I spent inside my laboratory yielded far more than just a single treatment for Liam. I had already developed an entire portfolio of highly lucrative synthetic chemical compounds. I handed the final signed document to my lead corporate attorney. The massive financial deal was now officially and completely closed. I stood up and walked into my private suite to change clothes. For 10 long years, my entire family had only seen me wearing baggy sweatpants and a stained lab coat. I was the plain scientist hovering in the background. Today, I was shedding that skin forever. I pulled on a razor-sharp, tailored black designer suit. I slipped into expensive stilettos that echoed with sheer authority. I checked my reflection applying dark crimson lipstick. I looked absolutely ruthless today. I looked like a billionaire. I walked out where my head of security was waiting. "The press conference is starting soon," he informed me quietly. I nodded confidently, stepping into the waiting elevator. "Drive me directly to the convention center," I ordered, my voice steady. "And lock the heavy doors behind them once they enter the conference hall. No one leaves until I am completely and utterly finished with them." The grand ballroom of the downtown convention center was packed to absolute capacity. Flashbulbs strobed like lightning across the room, illuminating the massive Astor Real Estate Empire banners flanking the central stage. At the podium stood my brother-in-law, Andre. He wore a bespoke navy suit projecting the ultimate image of a seasoned Wall Street savior. He gripped the edges of the mahogany podium, leaning into the bank of microphones with an expression of deep manufactured concern. The press corps hung on his every word. "We face a financial crisis today," Andre projected effortlessly. He gestured to a massive pie chart. "As a fiduciary expert, I have reviewed the capital structures of my sister-in-law. Her biomedical startup is completely insolvent. She is drowning in operational debt, lacking the liquidity to manufacture this life-saving compound. She hoards a miracle cure out of pure spite while facing Chapter 11 bankruptcy." He pointed an accusatory finger toward my empty seat. The camera zoomed in on the vacant chair. Sienna sat perfectly poised in a white designer dress, nodding solemnly. Next to her, my parents Thomas and Susan clung to each other, playing their roles as the exhausted family members looking up with sheer adoration. "Thankfully, the Astor family wealth is here to intervene." Andre continued, smiling brilliantly. "We are petitioning the federal government to invoke eminent domain. We will absorb her failing laboratory and save this medicine. We cannot let one unstable researcher hold the national healthcare system hostage." The journalists typed furiously. Andre had them fooled. He wove a perfect narrative of corporate heroism, wrapping his hostile takeover in humanitarian concern. He paused, waiting for the applause to ripple through the room. That was the exact moment the heavy brass handles of the double doors turned. The doors swung open with a resounding thud. Every single camera pivoted away from the stage. I walked down the center aisle. I was not wearing the stained lab coat they expected. I wore a razor-sharp black designer suit that cost more than my parents made in a year. My stiletto heels clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor, a predatory tempo that silenced the crowd. Reporters parted for me, camera shutters clicking frantically as they captured the rogue scientist crashing her public execution. The confident smile melted off the face of Andre. Sienna stood up abruptly. In the front row, my mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest in genuine panic. My mother turned deathly pale. She leaned over to my father, whispering frantically as the entire narrative they had spent all morning building began to crack under the sheer weight of my unexpected arrival. They expected me to hide in fear. "Stella, what are you doing?" my father hissed, stepping into the aisle to block me. He grabbed my elbow tightly. "You are humiliating us. Sit down right now before you make this any worse for yourself. You are destroying your last chance at redemption." my father whispered aggressively, trying to shield his angry face from the flashing cameras. If you do not turn around and walk out those doors right now, we will make sure you spend the rest of your miserable life rotting in a federal prison cell. I did not break my stride. I yanked my arm out of his grasp with such force he stumbled backward. I did not even look at him. I kept my eyes locked dead onto Andre. I climbed the short flight of stairs to the stage. Security guards moved to intercept me, but the sudden intense media frenzy made them hesitate. No one wanted to tackle the subject of the press conference on live national television. I walked straight up to the mahogany podium, standing shoulder to shoulder with my towering brother-in-law. Andre glared down at me, his jaw clenching. He leaned close to my ear, dropping his public relations voice. "Security's gonna drag you out of here in handcuffs, Stella. You're trespassing on Astor property." I ignored his threat entirely. I reached past him, grabbed the connection cable plugged into his expensive laptop and yanked it out. The massive projector screen behind us instantly went black. The crowd gasped collectively. Before Andre could react, I pulled my own sleek tablet from my portfolio and slammed the connection cable into its port. Andre tried to block my hand, but he was too slow. I looked at the sea of eager journalists holding their audio recorders high in the air. I grabbed the microphone, adjusting it to my height. The sound system hummed with feedback before settling. "You want to talk about insolvency, Andre?" I asked, my voice ringing out crystal clear across the silent ballroom. "You want to stand up here and play the financial savior for the cameras? Let us talk about real numbers. Let us talk about who is actually facing bankruptcy today." I tapped the screen of my tablet. The massive projector behind us flared back to life. The journalists scrambled to adjust their camera lenses. They expected to see my laboratory tax returns or a desperate defense of my scientific research. They got neither. The screen did not display anything related to my biotechnology company. It flashed bright red and blue, displaying a live, heavily restricted government database. The blinding light from the massive projector illuminated his horrified face. The giant letters at the top of the screen read, "Securities and Exchange Commission Active Investigation Dashboard." Right in the center of the live federal feed, flashing with a Priority 1 alert, was the exact name of the prestigious hedge fund managed by my brother-in-law. The room erupted into total chaos. The financial reporters in the front rows instantly recognized the severe implications of the federal dashboard. Andre staggered backward, his confident posture collapsing as he stared up at the massive screen in sheer, unadulterated terror. The trap he built for me had just snapped shut around his own neck. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute and suffocating. Every camera lens was locked onto the massive projection screen behind me. The bright red banner of the Securities and Exchange Commission reflected across the stunned faces of the journalists. I gripped the sides of the mahogany podium, leaning into the bank of microphones. My voice echoed through the convention center, calm, steady, and utterly lethal. "You came here today expecting a tragedy," I announced. "You were promised a story about a brilliant hedge fund manager stepping in to save a dying biotechnology startup from a bitter woman. You were told that the Astor Empire was performing an act of corporate heroism by seizing my patent for the greater good." I paused, letting my gaze sweep over to where Andre stood frozen beside the stage. "But my brilliant brother-in-law is not trying to save lives. He is trying to save himself from federal prison." I tapped the screen of my tablet. The dashboard zoomed in on the financial filings of his hedge fund. A collective gasp rippled through the press corps as the raw numbers appeared against the dark screen. "Andre is not managing a successful Wall Street empire," I continued. "His hedge fund is $40 million in debt. He engaged in illegal naked short selling over the past 18 months, betting against pharmaceutical companies that succeeded. When those massive margin calls came due, his entire portfolio collapsed. He has been hiding his catastrophic losses from his investors, from the federal government, and from his own family. He is completely underwater and desperate for liquidity." Sienna Astor jumped up from her front row seat, her face flushed with indignant rage. "That is a complete lie," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You are making this up because you are jealous of us." I did not even blink at her outburst. I kept my attention focused entirely on the journalists. He needed a massive injection of cash to cover his tracks before the federal auditors arrived, I explained. So he made a quiet arrangement with the Astor family. He promised the patriarch of the Astor real estate empire that he would use his corporate lawyers to legally seize my patent. In exchange for handing over my multi-billion-dollar synthetic compound, the Astor family agreed to wire him a massive kickback hidden as a real estate consultation fee. He was willing to strip me of my life work just to plug the hole in his fraudulent hedge fund. I tapped my tablet again. The screen transitioned from the federal investigation dashboard to a flowchart of offshore banking records. The screen illuminated a complex web of international wire transfers. Let us look at the evidence, I projected, my tone unwavering. Here we have a direct transfer of $12 million originating from the primary holding company of the Astor real estate empire. Follow the routing numbers. The money moves through a series of shell companies in the Cayman Islands before landing directly into a private offshore trust. I highlighted the account, a trust owned and operated by Andre. From the front row, my sister Rachel sprang to her feet, her designer gown twisted around her legs as she scrambled toward the edge of the stage. "You are a liar!" Rachel screamed, her voice shrill. "You fabricated these documents. You hacked into his computer and made all of this up just to ruin our lives because you are a miserable failure. Andre is a brilliant investor. He would never do something so reckless." I looked down at my sister with pure, unadulterated pity. "I did not fabricate anything, Rachel," I replied coldly, leaning closer to the microphone so everyone could hear every word. "These documents were pulled directly from his encrypted financial server. And you might want to look a little closer at the incorporation documents for those offshore shell companies." I zoomed in on the bottom of the banking ledger. Your signature is right there on the bottom line next to his. You are listed as the co-director of the fraudulent accounts. The blood completely drained from the face of my sister. She stared at her own signature magnified 20 feet tall on the screen behind me. In that moment, the silence was shattered by a chorus of ringing cell phones. Every financial journalist in the room began receiving urgent alerts. Andre started sweating profusely. His breathing became shallow and erratic. His own phone began vibrating in his jacket pocket as his furious investors watched the live broadcast. Realizing his entire career and freedom were vaporizing on live national television, Andre completely lost his composure. He let out a feral shout and lunged across the stage toward my podium, reaching out to smash my tablet. Before he could even touch my equipment, 2 of my security guards intercepted him, shoving him backward. He stumbled, his expensive suit rumpling as he gasped for air, humiliated in front of the flashing cameras. Sensing the absolute destruction of their golden son-in-law, my father decided to intervene. Thomas scrambled up from his seat, rushing to a nearby reporter and grabbing a microphone from their hands. He pointed it directly at me, his face twisted in a mask of rage. "Do not listen to a single word she says," my father shouted into the stolen microphone, trying to drown out the murmuring crowd. "She is nothing but a broke, bitter ex-wife. She is completely insane. She has never contributed a single dime to this family. She is a parasite who just wants to destroy the people who actually work hard for a living." I looked down at the red, furious face of my father. I did not feel a single ounce of fear or sadness. I felt absolute power. I smiled, a slow, predatory expression that made the room fall silent. "Oh, Dad," I said, my voice echoing smoothly through the speakers. "I was hoping you would say that." I kept my eyes locked on the furious face of my father. I tapped the glossy screen of my tablet one more time. The massive projector behind me shifted away from the catastrophic federal investigation dashboard of my brother-in-law. The display illuminated the darkened ballroom with a crisp, detailed financial ledger from a highly secure private bank. The logo at the top of the screen read Horizon Chemical Holdings. The journalists in the front rows leaned forward, their camera lenses zooming in on the neatly organized columns of outgoing wire transfers. "For the past 7 years, my family has boasted about their incredible financial acumen," I projected smoothly into the microphone. My father loved to brag at his elite dinner parties about a mysterious corporate sponsor who believed in his failing logistics business so deeply that they funded his entire luxury lifestyle. I highlighted the first row of transactions. That same anonymous entity completely paid off the massive underwater mortgage on the sprawling waterfront estate belonging to my parents. I swiped my finger down the tablet screen, highlighting the next block of transfers. The sponsor also quietly erased the out-of-control designer shopping debts accumulated by my sister Rachel, saving her from complete financial ruin on 3 separate occasions. And lastly, I highlighted the final column. It paid the exorbitant $200,000 initiation fee and the massive monthly dues for the ultra-exclusive country club where Andre networks with his wealthy investors. I looked directly down at my father, who was staring up at the screen with absolute uncomprehending horror. Horizon Chemical Holdings is not a mysterious venture capital firm, I announced to the dead silent room. It is a private asset management trust that I personally own. The press corps erupted into a frenzy of whispers and frantic typing. My mother Susan let out a sharp gasp, her hands trembling as she grabbed the arm of my father for support. You have spent the last 10 years telling everyone in your social circle that I was a pathetic, broke scientist who wasted her life in a sterile laboratory, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm register. You stood on this stage today and called me a parasite in front of the national media. I stepped out from behind the mahogany podium, walking right up to the edge of the stage so I could look dead into the terrified eyes of my parents. You called me a parasite while you literally lived off the royalties of my early chemical patents, I stated, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. Every luxury car you drove, every designer gown Rachel wore to her charity galas, and every expensive steak Andre ordered at his country club was paid for by the exact same scientific research you relentlessly mocked me for pursuing. I was not the parasite. You were all feeding off me. Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The arrogant, boastful man who had controlled my life for 33 years was completely stripped of his power. And since you so generously reminded me today that I have never contributed a dime to this family, I decided to finally make that statement a reality, I said, offering a cold, terrifying smile. Before I walked into this press conference, I logged into the trust management portal. I just canceled the auto pay on your accounts. Your house goes into foreclosure at midnight tonight. The reality of absolute financial ruin crashed down upon my mother. Susan let out a devastating, breathless sob and dropped directly to her knees on the hard floor of the convention center. Her expensive designer handbag spilled across the aisle as she buried her face in her hands, weeping hysterically as the terrifying truth set in. They had zero savings. They had zero assets. Without my secret monthly deposits, they were utterly and completely bankrupt. The press cameras flashed wildly, capturing the spectacular downfall of the hypocritical parents who had just attempted to destroy their own daughter on national television. Rachel stood frozen beside her arrested husband, her mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. She stared down at her expensive couture gown, suddenly realizing that her entire glamorous lifestyle was a total illusion funded by the exact same sister she had spent her life bullying. The golden child was entirely penniless. My father looked like he had physically aged 20 years in a matter of seconds. He stared at me with wide, hollow eyes, realizing he had just publicly humiliated the only person keeping him out of a homeless shelter. He reached out a trembling hand toward the stage, trying to formulate a desperate apology. But the deafening sound of camera shutters completely drowned out his pathetic attempt to speak. The humiliation was absolute, broadcast live to millions of viewers across the country. The chaotic media frenzy was momentarily pierced by the sharp, entitled voice of Sienna. She stomped forward, shoving past my weeping mother. Sienna planted her hands on her hips, her face flushed with indignant, arrogant rage. She refused to accept that her grand public execution had completely backfired. "So what if you have some hidden money?" Sienna screamed up at the stage, her voice echoing shrilly through the massive ballroom. "You are still nothing but a miserable, lonely lab rat. I am an Astor. My family possesses generational wealth that you cannot even begin to comprehend. If you think cutting off your pathetic parents changes anything, you are completely delusional. I will crush your little startup. I will buy your pathetic little lab by the end of the business day, and I will personally fire you in front of the entire board of directors. I looked right down at the furious screaming heiress. I very slowly shook my head, feeling a surge of pure, untouchable power. You cannot buy my company, Sienna, I replied smoothly, my steady voice echoing throughout the vast, completely dead, silent room. The blinding flashes of the press cameras illuminated the tear-stained face of my mother as she remained crumpled on the floor. Sienna stood at the edge of the stage, her chest heaving with arrogant fury. She was entirely convinced that her family wealth could solve any problem, fix any mistake, and buy any company. She glared up at me, waiting for me to cower at her threat of a corporate buyout. I did not even answer her. The heavy velvet curtains on the right side of the grand stage parted. Two impeccably dressed men walked directly into the blinding glare of the media spotlights. The room, which had been buzzing with the chaotic fallout of my financial revelations, suddenly fell into a confused hush. The financial reporters in the front row lowered their cameras, exchanging bewildered glances as they instantly recognized the two powerful figures approaching my podium. The first man was the regional director of the Federal Drug Administration. The second man walking confidently beside him was the chief executive officer of Vanguard Therapeutics, the largest and most influential global pharmaceutical titan in the world. They bypassed my ruined brother-in-law, stepped carefully over the tangled microphone cords, and stopped right beside me. Andre, still sweating profusely and clutching his ringing cell phone, took a stumbling step backward. He realized instantly that his attempt to seize my patent through federal channels was completely dead in the water. The FDA director adjusted his tie, leaned toward the central microphone, and looked out at the sea of journalists. He did not look at Sienna or my weeping parents. He addressed the national media with absolute, unshakable authority. We are here today to clarify the federal stance regarding this proprietary synthetic compound, the director announced, his voice booming through the convention center speakers. There will be no seizure of intellectual property under any health crisis clause. The federal government has officially reviewed the data from the independent clinical trials. I am incredibly proud to announce that the synthetic autoimmune compound developed by this laboratory has successfully passed all Phase 3 global trials with unprecedented efficacy rates. It is fully approved for immediate global distribution. A wave of shocked murmurs rolled through the crowd, but the director stepped back, allowing the pharmaceutical executive to take the microphone. The CEO of Vanguard Therapeutics smiled warmly at me before addressing the press. He placed his hands firmly on the podium. For the past 6 months, my corporation has been conducting a rigorous, highly confidential audit of this groundbreaking biomedical startup, the executive stated smoothly. We did not find an insolvent, bankrupt laboratory, as was falsely claimed on this stage earlier today. We found a robust, highly scalable medical enterprise holding the most valuable chemical patent of the decade. Because of the sheer magnitude of this medical breakthrough, this company is officially going public today. The initial public offering launched exactly 20 minutes ago on the New York Stock Exchange. The financial journalists practically trampled each other trying to check their mobile devices. Screens illuminated across the dark ballroom as reporters frantically pulled up the live stock market feeds. My father, still standing frozen near the front row, stared up at the executive with a slack jaw. I am thrilled to confirm the opening numbers, the CEO continued, his voice echoing with undeniable triumph. As of this exact moment, the biomedical startup we are discussing has secured an opening market valuation of exactly $4 billion. The collective gasp from the audience was deafening. $4 billion. The number hung heavily in the dead silent air, radiating with absolute, untouchable power. My sister Rachel slumped against the front row, seating her eyes wide with sheer disbelief. She had spent her entire life mocking me for wearing cheap clothes and working long hours in a windowless room. Now she was staring at a self-made billionaire, my parents, who had just lost their luxury mansion, and their entire social standing looked physically ill. They had aggressively alienated the most successful person their family had ever produced, trading my loyalty for a fraudulent hedge fund manager who was currently pacing the floor in a sheer panic. Sienna Astor could not handle the massive shift in power. Her face turned a violent shade of red. She stomped her expensive heel against the hardwood floor, refusing to accept that her family name meant absolutely nothing in this room. She pointed a trembling finger directly at the pharmaceutical executive. "I do not care about your initial public offering," Sienna shrieked, her voice cracking with desperate entitlement. "I am an Astor. My father manages a real estate portfolio worth 10 times that amount. We will simply outbid your pharmaceutical company. I will buy a controlling interest in her pathetic little laboratory today. I will purchase the entire board of directors, and I will personally fire her before she can even walk out of this building." The CEO of Vanguard Therapeutics looked down at the screaming heiress. He let out a deep, genuine laugh that echoed mockingly through the microphone. He shook his head, looking at her with nothing but pure pity. "Miss Astor, I think you severely misunderstand the corporate structure of this arrangement." The executive replied, a sharp edge of amusement in his tone. "Vanguard Therapeutics is not buying her company. We could never afford to buy it. We are merely partnering with it for global distribution, and Stella is certainly not a low-level employee you can terminate. She holds 85% of the voting shares. She is the sole founder, the majority owner, and the chairman of the board. You do not have enough liquid capital to even sit at her table." On the far side of the stage, an orderly wheeled Liam forward in a hospital chair. His face was entirely devoid of color. He sat slumped in the wheelchair, his trembling hands gripping the armrests as he stared up at his billionaire former wife. The microphone picked up the desperate, fragile whisper of my former husband. The entire ballroom held its breath as the realization washed over the crowd. I stood at the podium, looking down at the man who had discarded me like trash. "Yes, Liam," I replied, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "I am the only perfect genetic match you have." The silence was instantly shattered by the booming voice of my brother-in-law. Andre stepped forward, his face glistening with cold sweat, trying to salvage any shred of control over the disastrous situation. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "We will get a court order," Andre shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "We will file an emergency medical injunction today. I will have a federal judge force you to undergo the extraction procedure. You cannot withhold life-saving biological material from a dying man." I let out a sharp laugh that cut through the tension in the room. I looked at the disgraced hedge fund manager with pure disdain. "You really should have consulted your expensive corporate lawyers before making such an incredibly stupid threat on live television," I replied smoothly. "Under United States law, bodily autonomy is an absolute fundamental right. You cannot force a bone marrow donation. You cannot compel anyone to surrender their organs or tissue against their will, not even with a federal mandate, and certainly not even with a Supreme Court order. My body belongs to me, Andre, and your fraudulent money cannot buy a single drop of my blood." Sienna gripped the handles of the wheelchair, her knuckles turning white. "You have to do it," she shrieked. "You cannot just let him die." I turned my attention away from the hysterical heiress and looked directly down at Liam. He was staring up at me with wide eyes, realizing the terrifying magnitude of his catastrophic betrayal. I stepped out from behind the mahogany podium, walking to the very edge of the stage, so there was no distance between his failure and my victory. "I did not want to let you die, Liam," I said, keeping my tone remarkably calm. "In fact, I spent the last month of our marriage preparing to save your life." The press corps fell completely silent again, cameras rolling to capture every single word. "I spent 2 agonizing weeks undergoing the brutal marrow extraction process," I revealed, my voice projecting across the massive convention center. "I endured the painful bone drilling. I suffered through the severe medical recovery alone in our house while you were busy sleeping with Sienna on my imported leather sofa. I went through physical agony because I believed you were a husband worth saving. I had the life-saving marrow extracted, purified, and prepped for your immediate transplant." Liam let out a choked, devastated sob, his hands shaking violently as he gripped his knees. "You had it," He gasped, tears streaming down his pale face. You had the cure. I nodded slowly, showing absolutely no mercy. I had the cure sitting in a secure cryogenic freezer waiting for your scheduled surgery. But you could not wait to marry the Astor heiress, could you? I asked, letting the sheer irony of his choices hang heavily in the air. You were so blinded by the promise of her family wealth and her shiny black credit cards that you demanded an expedited legal separation. You bribed a sleazy lawyer to force the divorce through on a random Tuesday just so you could immediately announce your grand engagement. By finalizing the divorce so aggressively, you legally severed my obligation to be your donor. You signed away your own life. My mother let out a horrified wail, covering her mouth as the true cost of their betrayal became undeniable. Rachel stood frozen in the front row, staring at me as if she were looking at an entirely different species. They had all traded a miraculous cure for empty social climbing, and now they were left with absolutely nothing. Liam reached out a frail, shaking hand toward the stage, his fingers grasping at the empty air. "Please, Stella," he begged, his voice breaking into a pathetic whimper. "I am so incredibly sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Just give me the marrow. I will do anything you want. I will leave Sienna right now. Please just give me the transplant." I looked down at him with a cold, unwavering stare. "I cannot give you the marrow, Liam," I stated firmly, offering a slight tilt of my head. "I could not let good marrow go to waste sitting in a freezer while you paraded around with your new mistress. The biological material was highly viable, and there are thousands of people suffering in the world who actually deserve a second chance at life. So I checked the National Organ Registry earlier this week. I searched the database for pediatric patients battling severe autoimmune disorders. There was a 9-year-old boy living in Ohio with a similar partial genetic mutation who had been languishing on the waiting list for 4 years. His family had zero money, zero connections, and zero hope. I authorized the medical transfer. I donated your exact life-saving marrow to him yesterday morning. The massive convention crowd instantly erupted into absolute pandemonium. Journalists shouted over one another, camera flashes firing like strobe lights as the monumental weight of the revelation crashed down upon the convention center. Liam let out a harrowing, agonizing scream of sheer devastation. He lunged forward in his wheelchair, completely collapsing onto the hard floor as his frail body gave out. He lay there weeping uncontrollably on the ground, realizing the permanent fatal consequence of his treacherous greed. He traded his actual life for a young mistress and a meaningless diamond ring. Sienna stumbled backward in her designer heels, looking at the dying man writhing on the ground with pure, unadulterated revulsion. The grand corporate press conference instantly devolved into pure, spectacular, untethered chaos. The deafening chaos inside the grand ballroom reached a fever pitch as Liam writhed on the floor. Journalists shoved their microphones forward, capturing every pathetic sob. But his medical devastation was immediately eclipsed by a loud, authoritative command that cut through the roaring crowd. The heavy double doors at the back of the hall did not just open, they were shoved apart with sheer, unmistakable force. A dozen men and women wearing dark windbreakers marched directly down the center aisle. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had officially arrived. The lead agent, a tall man with a thick badge hanging around his neck, walked past the weeping Liam and the cameras. He did not look at me or the pharmaceutical executives on the stage. His eyes were locked on my brother-in-law. Andre tried to edge his way toward the side exit, his silk suit soaked in terrified sweat. Andre, the agent, announced, his voice booming over the remaining chatter. "We have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest." Andre froze, raising his trembling hands to placate the approaching officers. "There is a massive misunderstanding here," Andre stammered, his deep voice cracking. "I am a licensed fiduciary. I manage a billion-dollar hedge fund. You cannot storm into a private corporate event based on fake financial slides projected by a bitter woman." The federal agent did not blink at the arrogant defense. He grabbed the wrist of my brother-in-law, spinning him around and slamming him against the polished mahogany podium. The metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoed into the microphone. You are being placed under arrest for massive wire fraud insider trading and the illegal transfer of stolen corporate funds across borders, the agent recited coldly. The Securities and Exchange Commission has been watching your naked short selling scheme. The offshore wire transfers broadcasted here today provided the exact probable cause we needed to secure a federal warrant 10 minutes ago. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it. Rachel stood paralyzed in the front row. She watched in sheer horror as federal agents patted down her perfect, wealthy husband. The golden child of our family, the woman who had spent her existence mocking my modest laboratory salary, suddenly realized her glamorous lifestyle was a total criminal illusion. As an agent began reading Andre his Miranda rights, survival instinct took over. Rachel scrambled away from the stage, frantically waving her hands to distance herself from the man in handcuffs. "I have absolutely nothing to do with this!" Rachel shrieked, backing away from her struggling husband. "I am just his wife. I stay at home and manage our social calendars. I do not know anything about hedge funds or offshore accounts or missing millions." He lied to me. He manipulated my entire family. A female federal agent stepped directly into her path, blocking her escape route. The agent pulled a thick manila folder from her jacket and opened it, revealing a stack of printed financial documents. "Actually, you have everything to do with this," the agent corrected sharply. "We pulled the incorporation documents for the Cayman Islands shell companies used to launder the stolen investor capital. Your exact signature is on the bottom line of every single offshore account." Rachel stared at the documents, her face turning a ghastly shade of pale. "I did not read them," she cried, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "Andre just told me to sign some tax papers for our new yacht. You cannot arrest me for trusting my husband." "Ignorance is not a valid legal defense for international money laundering," the agent replied, pulling out a second pair of steel handcuffs. "You are officially listed as the co-director of a fraudulent financial enterprise. You are an active accessory to a federal crime. Turn around and put your hands behind your back right now." My parents. Thomas and Susan watched their perfect golden daughter being violently shoved against the wall by federal law enforcement. Susan let out a harrowing scream, grabbing her own hair in sheer panic. Thomas rushed forward, desperately trying to physically wedge himself between the federal agents and his favorite child. "You cannot do this!" Thomas bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "Andre is a respected Wall Street executive. My daughter is a prominent socialite. You are making a catastrophic mistake. Let them go right now." Andre, sweating and humiliated in his own handcuffs, snapped completely. He turned his furious gaze toward my father, deciding he was not going to sink alone. "Shut your mouth!" Thomas Andre roared over the flashing press cameras. "Do not act like an innocent bystander. You knew exactly where the cash was coming from to float your failing logistics company. I used your commercial shipping accounts to wash the stolen capital before wiring it overseas. You are completely complicit in hiding the funds." The federal agents immediately turned their harsh attention toward my father, pulling out their radios to call for additional transport units. Thomas stumbled backward, his arrogant bravado instantly vanishing as he realized his own son-in-law had just handed him over to the federal government on a silver platter. While my family imploded on live television, Sienna realized the entire ship was rapidly sinking. The arrogant heiress who had tried to buy my clinic and my company recognized she was surrounded by federal criminals and a dying, penniless fiancé. Sienna picked up her expensive designer handbag and tried to quietly slip out through the heavy service doors at the back of the convention hall. She pushed the metal bar, stepping into the dimly lit back hallway to quickly escape the media circus. But her escape route was already completely blocked off. Standing perfectly still in the center of the hallway, flanked by a massive team of private corporate security guards, was her father. The ruthless patriarch of the Astor real estate empire glared down at his trembling daughter with absolute terrifying fury. Sienna froze in the dark, dimly lit service hallway of the massive downtown convention center. Her father, Richard Astor, stood blocking the exit. He was an intimidating man who built a commercial real estate empire with pure ruthlessness, and right now his eyes were burning with absolute fury. Two massive corporate security guards flanked him, ensuring no reporters could slip through the doors to witness the impending confrontation. Sienna tried to put on her usual spoiled, charming act, stepping forward with a nervous smile. She reached out to touch his arm, but he violently swatted her hand away. "Do not even try to speak," he hissed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You have done enough talking today. I just spent the last 20 agonizing minutes watching my daughter become the national poster child for corporate fraud and public humiliation." Sienna staggered backward, her face turning pale. "Dad, it is not my fault," she stammered, pointing frantically toward the main ballroom doors. "Andre lied to us about his hedge fund, and Liam completely lied to me about his medical condition. I had absolutely no idea the federal government was investigating them." Richard Astor took a menacing step forward, backing his daughter against the cold wall. "I do not care what they told you," he snarled, pulling a smartphone from his custom-tailored suit jacket. He shoved the bright screen directly into her face. "Look at this. Look at what your little romantic medical drama is doing to my legacy." The screen displayed the live stock market ticker for Astor Real Estate Holdings. The graph showed a catastrophic red line plunging straight downward. "Because of your highly publicized association with a federal money laundering scheme and a dying penniless medical fraud, our corporate stock is currently in an absolute freefall," he explained, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "Investors are rapidly pulling out of our commercial developments by the minute. You went on national television and threatened to buy illegal organs on the black market using my money. You are a complete and total public relations nightmare, Sienna." Sienna began to hyperventilate, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. "But I can fix it," she cried, her voice echoing shrilly in the corridor. "I will hire the best crisis management firm in the entire city. I will immediately go on a highly publicized apology tour. Just give me a single chance to repair the severe damage." Richard Astor shook his head in absolute disgust. He held out his open palm, waiting expectantly. "Hand it over," he commanded. Sienna stared at his outstretched hand in sheer confusion. "Hand what over my exclusive black card?" he ordered coldly. "The keys to the luxury penthouse apartment I bought you, the keys to the imported sports car, and that ridiculous diamond engagement ring your pathetic boyfriend bought with stolen residential equity. Give me absolutely everything right now." Sienna clutched her heavy designer handbag tightly to her chest, shaking her head in sheer panic. "Dad, please, you cannot do this to me. I will literally have nothing." "That is exactly the point," he replied, snapping his fingers at one of the security guards. The massive corporate guard stepped forward and effortlessly pulled the designer handbag out of her desperate, shaking grip. The guard unzipped the purse, extracted her premium credit cards and her platinum key fobs, and handed them directly to her father. Richard Astor looked down at his weeping, terrified daughter without a single ounce of paternal sympathy. "You are a massive corporate liability to my empire," he stated with lethal precision. "The engagement is officially over. You are now completely cut off from the family trust until you learn how the real world actually works. Do not ever come back to my estate. Do not call your mother. You are entirely on your own." He turned his back on her, signaling his security team to follow him down the long corridor. Sienna collapsed against the cold concrete wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. She sat there alone in her expensive white couture gown, completely stripped of every single financial advantage she had ever possessed in her entire life. Sienna slowly pulled herself up from the cold concrete floor. She looked down at her empty, bare ring finger. With shaking hands, she pushed open the heavy doors and walked back into the chaotic convention hall. The federal agents were currently hauling her former brother-in-law out. Right in the center of the loud frenzy sat Liam, slumped weakly in his wheelchair. He was pale, gasping for air, and utterly destitute. Sienna marched straight up to the dying man. Liam looked up with desperate eyes, hoping his wealthy fiancée would somehow save him. Instead, Sienna glared at him with unadulterated revulsion. She spat directly onto his expensive designer shoes. "You completely ruined my entire life," she screamed loudly. She turned her back on him and stormed out of the convention center into the rainy city street, leaving him alone with absolutely nothing but the wet clothes on her back. Liam was left completely isolated in the middle of the massive ballroom. His wealthy mistress had abandoned him. His brother-in-law was being loaded into a federal vehicle, and his former in-laws were completely bankrupt. The flashing cameras of the relentless press corps turned their merciless focus onto his pathetic, crumbling figure. The reality of his painful, impending demise settled heavily into his bones. He desperately scanned the massive room, his terrified eyes frantically searching the chaotic crowd for the one person who possessed the power to save him. He spotted me standing near the edge of the stage. "Stella," he choked out, raising a trembling hand in my direction. "Please help me." But I was already flanked by my elite corporate security team. They formed an impenetrable wall of dark suits between us. I simply turned my back on his pathetic cries and confidently walked far away. I signed the divorce papers. My husband eagerly started a new life with his wealthy young mistress. A few days later, his doctor quietly told him that his former wife would no longer be involved in his treatment. My name is Stella, and I am 33 years old. I built a multi-billion-dollar biomedical empire while my treacherous family mocked me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you love seeing greedy people get exactly what they deserve. The morning after the disastrous press conference, I was sitting in my executive office when my secure phone rang. My lead corporate attorney informed me that Liam was not giving up yet. Despite being publicly humiliated and completely abandoned by the Astor family, my former husband was making one last desperate play. His sleazy divorce lawyer had just marched into the downtown Seattle family court and filed an aggressive emergency motion to completely invalidate our finalized divorce decree. The legal filing claimed that Liam was severely medically compromised and under extreme emotional distress when he signed the separation papers. But his actual goal was painfully obvious to anyone paying attention. Liam had watched the national news broadcasts playing on repeat in his hospital room. He knew my biotechnology startup had just gone public with an unprecedented $4 billion valuation. Since he was now utterly broke, rapidly dying, and permanently dumped by Sienna, he decided he was entitled to exactly half of my newly revealed corporate fortune. 2 hours later, I arrived at the courthouse wearing a tailored charcoal suit that projected absolute authority. I walked into the crowded courtroom flanked by my elite legal team. Liam was already there. He had been wheeled in by a disgruntled hospital orderly, looking incredibly pathetic and weak in his oversized clothes. Beside him stood a cheap, loud-mouthed attorney who immediately started grandstanding the second the judge entered the room. The attorney slammed his hands on the wooden table, demanding the presiding judge pause the divorce proceedings and immediately freeze all of my personal and corporate marital assets. He loudly argued that Liam was the victim of a massive financial deception and deserved 50% of my corporate shares as compensation for his suffering. The judge, an imposing woman with absolutely no patience for nonsense, adjusted her heavy reading glasses and sternly looked over the frantic legal filing. She asked my attorney if we had a response to these wild allegations. My lawyer did not argue or raise his voice. He simply stood up, smoothed his expensive tie, and handed the judge a single, perfectly bound legal document. It was our original prenuptial agreement. Liam stared across the aisle in absolute, unadulterated horror as the stern judge began to read the document aloud for the court record. 5 years ago, when we first got married, Liam was convinced his pathetic little software idea was going to make him the next Silicon Valley billionaire. He looked down on my medical research, entirely convinced I would spend my entire life making a tiny, insignificant laboratory salary. He was absolutely terrified that my supposedly bleak financial future would drag him down, so he aggressively forced me to sign an ironclad prenuptial agreement before our wedding day. He had hired a ruthless corporate lawyer back then to draft the most restrictive contract imaginable, completely locking me out of his hypothetical future fortune. But he was too arrogant to realize that the sword swung both ways. The judge cleared her throat, her voice echoing loudly off the wood-paneled walls. She read the specific undeniable clause that Liam had personally insisted upon including: all intellectual property, proprietary patents, and corporate assets generated or acquired by either party during the duration of this marriage shall remain sole and separate property, entirely immune to any marital division or equitable distribution. The entire courtroom fell perfectly silent as the heavy words settled over the room. Liam had legally barricaded himself out of my $4 billion empire years before I even founded it. He tried to protect his imaginary wealth, and in doing so, he completely shielded my massive fortune from his own greedy hands. The judge looked down at the shrinking, terrified man in the wheelchair with absolute withering disgust. She dropped the heavy stack of papers onto her desk with a loud, resounding thud. She did not just swiftly dismiss the emergency motion, she literally laughed his sleazy lawyer right out of her courtroom. Furthermore, the judge was so deeply insulted by the blatant attempt to manipulate the legal system that she immediately issued a massive financial sanction directly against Liam for intentionally filing a frivolous, bad faith lawsuit. As the heavy wooden gavel slammed down with finality, the grim reality of his self-inflicted destruction cemented itself into his bones. His desperate attempt to steal my life work had failed spectacularly. Liam was officially penniless, permanently saddled with staggering court fines. He could never pay, completely homeless, without his Astor safety net, entirely without a loyal wife, and totally without a cure. I calmly stood up from the polished defense table, slowly buttoned my tailored charcoal jacket, and walked smoothly down the center aisle without giving the sobbing man a single backward glance. The heavy courtroom doors swung shut behind me completely, severing my final connection to the parasite who had stolen my youth. I stepped out of the courthouse and directly into the bright Seattle sunlight, breathing in the crisp air of absolute freedom. I was leaving him to painfully rot in the miserable, inescapable trap he had so aggressively built for himself. However, my incredibly satisfying legal victory over my treacherous former husband was only the first phase of my righteous reckoning today. My deeply deceitful parents were about to quickly discover the brutal consequences of their own incredibly greedy actions. The upcoming retribution would be entirely ruthless and highly absolute. The midnight deadline I set during the press conference arrived with absolute precision. At exactly 12 o'clock, the automated financial systems of my private asset management trust executed their program directives. The massive safety net that had propped up the fraudulent, luxurious lifestyle of my parents evaporated into thin air. By the time the sun rose over Seattle, the financial consequences had fully materialized into a brutal physical reality. Thomas and Susan awoke not to the peaceful sounds of their waterfront estate, but to the loud, aggressive pounding of county sheriffs on their custom mahogany front doors. The bank wasted no time. Because the property was already heavily leveraged and previously default adjacent before my trust intervened, the foreclosure process moved with terrifying speed. My mother answered the door, wearing her expensive silk robe, her face pale and drawn. The lead sheriff handed her a stark eviction notice, informing her she had exactly 30 minutes to gather her immediate personal belongings and vacate the premises. My father tried to argue, puffing out his chest and attempting to use his usual arrogant bluster. He demanded to call his lawyers, threatening to have the officers fired for disrespecting a prominent business executive. The officers simply stared at him with blank, unsympathetic expressions. They had seen countless wealthy people fall from grace, and Thomas was no different. Susan ran through the massive, echoing house, frantically shoving designer clothes, expensive jewelry, and whatever cash she could find into a single leather suitcase. 30 minutes later, 2 armed deputies physically escorted my weeping mother and completely defeated father down their sweeping cobblestone driveway. They were unceremoniously deposited onto the public sidewalk right outside their imposing iron security gates. As they stood there shivering in the crisp air, holding a single suitcase containing the pathetic remnants of their ruined lives, a sleek black town car rolled slowly past them. It was a couple from their elite country club, the very same people my parents had dined with just a week ago. Susan eagerly waved her hand, hoping her wealthy friends would stop and offer them a ride or a place to stay. Instead, the driver kept his eyes locked straight ahead, and the country club couple deliberately rolled up their tinted windows, pretending they did not see the disgraced bankrupt pair standing on the curb. They were officially outcasts. With nowhere else to go and their credit cards entirely frozen, my desperate parents did the only thing they could think of. They hailed a cheap city taxi using the last of their cash and directed the driver straight to the towering glass skyscraper that housed my newly public biomedical corporation. They bypassed the outdoor plaza and stumbled into the marble-floored lobby of my headquarters. They looked completely out of place among the sharp, fast-paced scientists and corporate executives buzzing around the building. Susan marched right up to the massive reception desk, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She slammed her hand on the granite counter, demanding the security personnel call me down immediately. "Stella is my daughter." Susan wept loudly, causing several employees to stop and stare at the dramatic display. "She has to see us. We have absolutely nothing left. The bank took our house, they seized our cars, and all of our so-called friends have completely abandoned us. Please, you have to let us upstairs." Thomas stood beside her, trying to maintain some shred of his broken dignity. He looked up at the security cameras mounted on the ceiling, knowing I was likely watching the feed from my executive suite. "Stella, please," my father called out, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "We made a terrible mistake. We were blinded by the money and the prestige. But we are your family. We raised you. You are our daughter, and blood is thicker than water. You cannot just leave us to freeze on the streets." I was indeed watching the live security feed from my top-floor office. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I picked up a manila envelope from my desk, stepped into my private elevator, and descended to the main lobby. The doors opened with a soft chime. My parents gasped in relief when they saw me walking toward them. Susan reached out her arms, fully expecting a tearful, forgiving embrace. I stopped several feet away, keeping a cold, impenetrable distance between us. I did not yell, I did not raise my voice or show a fraction of anger. I simply extended my arm and handed the heavy manila envelope directly to my father. "This is a permanent court-ordered restraining order," I stated calmly, my voice echoing in the quiet lobby. "If you or your disgraced wife come within 500 yards of me, my residence, or any building owned by my company, you will immediately join your son-in-law in a federal prison cell." My mother stared at the legal document in absolute horror, her hands shaking violently. "You cannot do this," Susan sobbed, falling to her knees. "We have nowhere to go. We have no money for food." "You should have thought about your retirement plan before you bit the hand that fed you," I replied smoothly. I signaled my head of security. "Escort them off my property." As the guards grabbed my screaming parents by the arms and dragged them toward the revolving glass doors, my phone vibrated. The caller identification displayed an unknown number. I answered it, hearing the frantic, hysterical weeping of my sister on the other end. "Stella, please do not hang up," Rachel begged from a prepaid burner phone inside a federal holding cell. "They set my bail at $100,000. I have absolutely no money. You have to bail me out." The heavy glass doors of my corporate headquarters had barely slid shut behind my disgraced parents when the burner phone sitting on my pristine desk began to vibrate. The caller identification displayed a restricted government number. I took a slow breath, smoothed the lapel of my tailored black suit, and pressed the answer button. An automated voice informed me that I was receiving a collect call from a federal holding facility. I accepted the charges. The line clicked, and immediately, the frantic, hyperventilating sobs of my older sister filled the quiet expanse of my executive office. "Stella. Oh my God, Stella, please tell me you are there." Rachel shrieked, her voice stripped of all its usual arrogant polish. She sounded like a terrified child. "They took everything from us. The federal agents seized our bank accounts, our luxury cars, and our penthouse. Andre is locked in a high-security cell, and they put me in a holding room with actual criminals." I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the bustling Seattle streets far below. I listened to the golden child of our family, the woman who had spent her entire 36 years treating me like an embarrassing peasant, reduced to absolutely nothing. "I need $100,000 for my bail," Rachel begged, her words tumbling out in a desperate wet rush. "The judge set the bond this morning. You are a billionaire now. $100,000 is literally spare change to you. Please, Stella, you have to wire the funds to the court right now. I cannot survive in here. The food is disgusting. The guards are mean, and I am wearing a horrible orange jumpsuit. If you just get me out of this concrete box, I swear I will make it up to you. I will be the best sister in the world. I will publicly apologize for everything I ever said about your research. I will do whatever you want. We are blood, Stella. You cannot let your own sister rot in a jail cell." I held the phone to my ear, listening to her pathetic bargaining. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy. I did not feel the familiar urge to accommodate her demands. I only felt a cold, satisfying wave of absolute justice. I leaned against the cool glass of my office window and spoke with lethal precision. "Do you remember the spring of my sophomore year of college?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. Rachel stopped crying for a second, clearly confused by the sudden shift in the conversation. "What are you talking about? I need bail money," she pleaded. I ignored her interruption. I had secured a highly competitive internship. I continued smoothly. But I needed a specific set of biomedical lab equipment to complete my independent study. I was working 3 jobs just to pay my tuition, and I was exactly $500 short. "I came to your luxury apartment, the one our parents paid for, and I begged you for a tiny loan. You had just spent $2,000 on a single designer handbag. I promised I would pay you back with interest the second my next paycheck cleared." I paused, letting the bitter memory hang heavily over the secure federal phone line. "Do you remember what you told me that day, Rachel?" My sister remained dead silent. "I remember it perfectly," I said, my tone hardening into pure ice. "You laughed right in my face. You looked me up and down in my cheap thrift store clothes and told me that giving money to a boring, talentless science nerd was a pathetic waste of resources. You said that investing in me was the exact equivalent of taking a match and burning cash. You told me to drop out and get a job at a retail store because I would never amount to anything." "Stella, please, that was a long time ago," Rachel whimpered, desperation bleeding back into her voice. "I was stupid. I was wrong. I am so sorry." "You are not sorry you said it," I replied without a shred of mercy. "You are only sorry that the broke nerd you mocked is now holding the keys to your entire future." "I am just taking your excellent financial advice, Rachel. I run a highly successful publicly traded biotechnology corporation now. I have a fiduciary duty to my shareholders. I make smart, calculated investments, and I absolutely do not burn money." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could hear her screaming my name, her voice dissolving into pure, unadulterated panic as the cold reality of her grim situation finally crashed down upon her. I pressed the red button instantly, cutting off her pathetic wails forever. I opened my contact settings and permanently blocked the federal facility number. The pampered, golden child was entirely on her own now. She was left to face the overworked public defender and the incredibly harsh reality of a mandatory 5-year federal prison sentence for her active role in the massive wire fraud scheme. There would be no more designer gowns, luxury vacations, or elite country club dinners for her. Only cold concrete walls and heavy steel bars. I grabbed my leather briefcase, turned off the overhead lights, and confidently strode out of my executive suite. I stepped into the private elevator, feeling remarkably light and utterly invincible. Just as the stainless steel doors began to smoothly slide shut, my secure corporate smartphone chimed with a high-priority notification. I glanced down at the bright screen. It was an urgent, encrypted email forwarded directly from the chief medical administrator at the elite downtown wellness clinic. The brief subject line made my heart skip a singular, triumphant beat. The parasitic ex-husband of mine had just been officially transferred to the end-of-life hospice care unit today. He was now completely out of time. The secure corporate smartphone on my glass desk vibrated. The encrypted email from the wellness clinic confirmed the inevitable medical reality. My former husband Liam had officially been transferred to the end-of-life hospice care unit. His body was shutting down. As I stared at the notification, another message flashed across my screen. It was a massive video file sent directly from a secure hospice network address. The subject line simply read my final apology to my beautiful wife. I clicked play and expanded the video to fill my large desktop monitor. Liam appeared on the screen, and the physical deterioration was staggering. The arrogant, well-dressed man who sneered at me from across a dining table just weeks ago was completely gone. He lay propped up against sterile white hospital pillows, his skin a ghastly shade of gray. His cheekbones jutted out sharply, and his hands trembled violently as he clutched a thin hospital blanket. "Stella, please do not turn this off," Liam begged, his voice raspy and pathetic. Tears streamed down his sunken face, dripping onto his pale hospital gown. "I know I do not deserve your time, but I am begging you to listen. I am so sorry for everything I did to you. I was an absolute fool. I let Sienna and her wealth blind me. I traded real love for a cheap illusion. Lying in this bed facing the end of my life, I finally realized that you were the only woman I ever truly loved. You sacrificed your youth to save me, and I threw you away. Please, Stella, just call me. Please let me hear your voice one last time so I can die in peace." I did not feel an ounce of pity as the video looped back to the beginning. I simply paused the playback and looked across my executive desk. Sitting opposite me was Dr. Mitchell, my newly appointed chief medical officer for the global distribution of our synthetic compound. He had been reviewing clinical trial data with me when the video arrived. He stared at the frozen image of the weeping man on my monitor, shaking his head in disbelief. "That is a profound display of regret," Dr. Mitchell murmured, taking a slow sip of his black coffee. "He genuinely sounds like a man completely shattered by his own terrible decisions." I leaned back in my executive chair and let out a cold, humorless laugh. "He is not shattered by his decisions." "Dr. Mitchell," I replied smoothly, tapping my pen against the glass desk. "He is absolutely terrified of the consequences. Look closer at the footage." I hit play again and muted the volume, forcing us to focus on the physical performance of my former husband. I pointed my pen directly at the high-definition monitor. "Watch his eyes," I instructed. "When people are genuinely remorseful, they look inward. They show deep shame." But Liam keeps darting his eyes toward the recording lens to ensure he is staying perfectly in frame. He is actively monitoring his own tragic performance. Look at the way he positions his trembling hands right near his face. That is not a natural resting posture. That is a calculated move to emphasize his physical frailty. He wants me to see how weak he is, so my basic human empathy will override my rational judgment. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, his professional gaze narrowing as he analyzed the silent footage. "You are right," he noted, looking slightly disgusted. "He is trying to emotionally manipulate you from a hospice bed." "Exactly," I stated firmly. "He does not regret abandoning me for Sienna. He only regrets that Sienna turned out to be a ruthless, penniless liability who spat on his shoes the second he became useless to her. He is not sorry he broke my heart. He is exclusively sorry that he is dying alone in a sterile room without his golden ticket. He wants me to validate his pathetic existence one final time before he breathes his last breath. He wants the profound comfort of knowing he still holds emotional power over the billionaire he threw away." Dr. Mitchell set his coffee mug down on the desk. "Are you going to respond to him?" he asked quietly. "Even a harsh reply might give you some final closure." I shook my head slowly, resting my hands flat on the desk. "A reply gives him exactly what he desperately craves," I explained. "If I call him and scream at him, my anger will give him a twisted sense of importance. It will prove that I still care enough to be furious. If I offer him forgiveness, it will completely absolve him of his crushing guilt. I refuse to give him the profound satisfaction of a final dramatic argument. The absolute worst punishment you can inflict on a raging narcissist is to completely ignore them. My total silence is the ultimate retribution." Without hesitation, I dragged the massive video file directly into the digital trash bin. I permanently emptied the folder, completely deleting his pathetic final performance from existence. I opened my corporate security portal and firmly blocked the entire network domain of the hospice facility, ensuring he could never send another message again. Liam would spend his final agonizing hours staring at a silent phone completely erased from my universe. I turned my attention away from the digital trash bin and focused on a highly secure medical file flashing on my secondary monitor. Dr. Mitchell smiled as he opened the attached report. "I wanted to show you the latest pediatric updates," he said. "The 9-year-old boy in Ohio who received the marrow transplant last month has made a complete miraculous recovery." I looked at the smiling photograph of the healthy child who now carried the very cure my former husband had foolishly thrown away. I picked up my pen. "Authorize a full college scholarship for that brave boy," I ordered smoothly. "Let us fund his entire future." I signed the divorce papers. My husband eagerly started a new life with his wealthy young mistress. A few days later, his doctor quietly told him that from now on, his ex-wife would no longer be involved in his treatment, and to hand over his VIP card. "My name is Stella. I am 33 years old. I spent my 20s locked inside a sterile research laboratory, trying to find a cure for the rare autoimmune disease destroying my husband. But instead of gratitude, I got betrayal." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a harsh lesson to those who took your sacrifices for granted. The hostility hit me the second I walked into the dining room of my parents' house. This was not a family dinner. This was an ambush. I had barely taken my seat when my mother Susan slammed a thick stack of documents onto my plate right over my untouched appetizer. "Sign the property release, Stella," she demanded, her voice echoing enough for the waitstaff to hear. "Give up the house." Sienna cannot stand the stench of a failed marriage lingering in her marital home, and we agree it is time you stop dragging Liam down. I looked across the expansive mahogany table. Liam sat there looking remarkably healthy, his arm wrapped possessively around Sienna Astor. Sienna was exactly 25, the deeply arrogant heir to a massive commercial real estate fortune, and she absolutely made sure everyone in the room knew it. She rested her slender hand on the pristine white tablecloth, deliberately flashing a diamond engagement ring the size of a large grape. It caught the brilliant light from the crystal chandelier overhead, practically blinding everyone sitting at the table. My father Thomas raised his expensive champagne glass toward the happy couple, completely ignoring my presence in the room. "You really should thank Sienna tonight," Stella Liam said with a deeply condescending smirk. He leaned back in his custom-tailored Italian suit, crossing his arms over his chest. "She generously paid off my entire mounting hospital debt last month with a single, effortless swipe of her exclusive black card. You have officially been rendered entirely useless to me. I do not need a broke, exhausted lab rat anymore. I finally have a real partner now. I have someone who actually knows how to live in the real glamorous world instead of constantly hiding behind a boring laboratory microscope." Sienna giggled loudly, tossing her perfectly styled blonde hair over her bare shoulder. "Do not be too hard on her, babe," she purred, her high-pitched voice dripping with incredibly fake pity. "It must be exceptionally difficult for her to accept that she could never provide for you the way my powerful family can. We just want a very clean break today. Just sign the property deed over to us. Take whatever meager, pathetic savings you have managed to scrape together and move into a small rental apartment. It is honestly the absolute least you can do after holding him back for so incredibly long." My mother nodded enthusiastically, taking a quick sip of her sparkling wine. "Do the right thing for once in your life, Stella. Your older sister Rachel and her highly successful husband Andre never caused this kind of utterly embarrassing public drama. Just sign the legal papers right now and leave us to celebrate in peace." I did not cry. I did not scream or beg for their approval. I simply reached into my black leather purse, pulled out my favorite fountain pen, and flipped directly to the very last page of the heavy property release. I signed my full name with a smooth, deliberate flourish and slid the thick stack of papers across the long dining table. Liam snatched the legal documents eagerly, his eyes lighting up with unbridled selfish greed. "Enjoy the house," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. I picked up my mobile phone, unlocked the digital screen, and dialed a highly specific number. I placed the phone right on the center of the table and turned on the loudspeaker. The crisp, professional voice of a senior bank representative answered almost immediately. "Hello, this is Vanguard Financial. How can I help you today?" "Yes," I replied calmly, leaning back in my chair. "This is Stella. I am calling to officially revoke my status as the primary financial guarantor on the Seattle residential property located on Mercer Island. The divorce is now fully finalized, and the property has been fully transferred to my former husband, Liam." "Understood," the representative said, keyboard keys clacking loudly in the background. "Guarantee status is officially revoked. We will immediately transfer the heavy financial burden of the $500,000 second mortgage solely to the new primary owner of the estate." The color instantly drained from the face of Liam. He dropped his silver fork. Sienna stopped smiling, her gaze snapping toward Liam in absolute confusion. "Second mortgage?" Sienna demanded, her voice losing all its sweet, breathy charm. "What second mortgage?" I picked up my glass of wine, swirling the dark liquid slowly before taking a deliberate sip. "Liam did not tell you," I asked, feigning innocent surprise. "That massive diamond ring you are wearing right now was not bought with Astor family money. Liam took out a $500,000 second mortgage on our shared home to purchase it. Since I just signed away my rights to the property, the debt is yours now. Congratulations on your engagement, Sienna. I hope you enjoy paying off your own ring for the next 30 years. Liam slammed his hands hard on the table. "You vindictive witch," he snarled loudly. "You think this matters at all? I will cancel your insurance." "Cancel the insurance, Liam," I softly said, smiling. "But check who truly pays your clinic bills." The morning air whipped across the private aviation terminal. I stood on the pristine tarmac, pulling my tailored wool coat tightly around my shoulders as I watched the ground crew fuel my Gulfstream jet. It was exactly 6 months since the chaotic press conference altered the trajectory of my existence. The massive media storm had finally subsided, leaving behind a profound sense of absolute clarity. My biotechnology startup was no longer just a rapidly growing corporate entity. It was a globally recognized pharmaceutical titan. We shipped my proprietary synthetic compound to hospitals across 50 countries, saving thousands of lives daily. I was no longer the exhausted researcher hiding in a windowless laboratory. I was a self-made billionaire and the newly appointed chairman of the board. Today marked the final step in my transition away from my toxic past. I was permanently relocating my primary corporate headquarters to Geneva, Switzerland. I had established a global foundation dedicated to funding independent medical research, entirely free from the predatory influence of greedy hedge fund managers and arrogant real estate heirs. I wanted to ensure no passionate scientist would ever have to beg for basic funding or endure emotional abuse to cure a devastating disease. My elite security detail stood in a protective perimeter around the aircraft, their dark suits contrasting sharply against the bright white fuselage of the jet. The lead security director approached me with a polite nod, holding my pre-flight briefing. "The flight path is fully cleared for international departure," he reported smoothly over the low, steady hum of the jet engines. "Your luggage is secured in the hold, and the flight attendants are preparing the cabin for a direct flight to Geneva. We are ready for you to board whenever you give the command." I looked out toward the distant Seattle skyline, taking one last moment to absorb the city where I had experienced my greatest heartbreaks and engineered my absolute triumph. I felt an incredible surge of untouchable freedom. I turned toward the sleek metal stairs leading up to the luxurious cabin of my private jet, completely ready to leave the miserable wreckage of my former life, thousands of miles behind me. Before my custom leather heel could even touch the very first metal step of the aircraft, a sudden, frantic commotion erupted near the perimeter fencing of the private airstrip. I paused, turning my head to see 2 disheveled figures desperately shoving their way past an outer gate attendant. The sheer physical transformation of the intruders was absolutely staggering. It was my parents, Thomas and Susan. They looked completely unrecognizable from the arrogant, socially obsessed socialites who had confidently mocked my scientific career just a few months ago. Without my secret financial trust funding their lavish lifestyle, they had rapidly deteriorated into haggard, broken shells of their former selves. Thomas wore a faded, poorly fitting jacket, his posture stooped and defeated by the crushing weight of public humiliation and absolute bankruptcy. Susan looked frail, her previously perfect hair unkempt, and her face heavily lined with sheer exhaustion and profound regret. They stumbled frantically across the wet tarmac, completely ignoring the loud roaring sound of the massive jet engines spooling up for departure. "Stella, please wait!" my mother shrieked hysterically, her voice cracking as she waved her trembling hands wildly in the air. "Please do not leave us here. We need to talk to you." Security guards immediately rushed forward to intercept them, but I raised a single hand, signaling my team to pause for a brief moment. Thomas fell to his knees on the hard asphalt just a few yards away from the bottom of the aircraft stairs. He looked up at me with wide, desperate eyes clutching his chest as he struggled to catch his breath. "We lost absolutely everything, Stella," my father cried out, the sheer desperation in his voice echoing over loud engine noise. "We are living in a tiny, miserable motel. Our friends completely abandoned us. Rachel is locked away in a federal prison and we have absolutely nothing left. We know we made catastrophic mistakes. We know we were blinded by pure greed and toxic ambition. But you are our own flesh and blood. You are our daughter. Please, we are begging you to give us one last chance to be a real family again." I stood at the top of the aircraft stairs looking down at the two pathetic people kneeling on the cold tarmac. I did not feel a single ounce of anger, sadness, or vindictive rage. I looked at the people who had raised me, the parents who had brutally discarded me for a fraudulent hedge fund manager, and I felt nothing but absolute hollow indifference. The immense power I held right now was not derived from my immense wealth. It came from my total emotional detachment. You do not get to claim the title of family only when it becomes financially convenient for you, I stated, my voice projecting clearly and coldly over the roaring engines. You traded your daughter for social climbing and empty prestige. You made your deliberate choices, and now you are simply living the exact life you actively earned. I looked my weeping mother dead in the eyes, offering no comfort and no forgiveness. "I do not have a family," I declared with absolute unwavering finality. "I have an empire." I turned my gaze to my head of security and gave a single subtle nod. "Remove them from the airstrip," I ordered smoothly. "Do it gently. Do not hurt them." The security team immediately stepped forward, firmly grasping my parents by their arms and lifting them off the tarmac. Susan thrashed wildly, screaming my name, but the guards simply escorted them away with clinical, emotionless precision. I denied them the profound satisfaction of a dramatic, tearful argument. I denied them closure. I turned my back on their fading cries, stepped into the quiet luxury of the aircraft cabin, and prepared to conquer the world. I signed the divorce papers. My husband eagerly started a new life with his wealthy young mistress. A few days later, his doctor quietly told him that from now on, his ex-wife would no longer be involved in his treatment and to hand over his VIP card. My name is Stella. I am 33 years old. I spent my 20s locked inside a sterile research laboratory, trying to find a cure for the rare autoimmune disease destroying my husband. But instead of gratitude, I got betrayal. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a harsh lesson to those who took your sacrifices for granted. The hostility hit me the second I walked into the dining room of my parents' house. This was not a family dinner. This was an ambush. I had barely taken my seat when my mother Susan slammed a thick stack of documents onto my plate right over my untouched appetizer. "Sign the property release, Stella," she demanded, her voice echoing enough for the waitstaff to hear. "Give up the house. Sienna cannot stand the stench of a failed marriage lingering in her marital home, and we agree it is time you stop dragging Liam down." I looked across the expansive mahogany table. Liam sat there looking remarkably healthy, his arm wrapped possessively around Sienna Astor. Sienna was exactly 25, the deeply arrogant heir to a massive commercial real estate fortune, and she absolutely made sure everyone in the room knew it. She rested her slender hand on the pristine white tablecloth, deliberately flashing a diamond engagement ring the size of a large grape. It caught the brilliant light from the crystal chandelier overhead, practically blinding everyone sitting at the table. My father Thomas raised his expensive champagne glass toward the happy couple, completely ignoring my presence in the room. "You really should thank Sienna tonight," Stella Liam said with a deeply condescending smirk. He leaned back in his custom-tailored Italian suit, crossing his arms over his chest. "She generously paid off my entire mounting hospital debt last month with a single, effortless swipe of her exclusive black card. You have officially been rendered entirely useless to me. I do not need a broke, exhausted lab rat anymore. I finally have a real partner now. I have someone who actually knows how to live in the real glamorous world, instead of constantly hiding behind a boring laboratory microscope." Sienna giggled loudly, tossing her perfectly styled blonde hair over her bare shoulder. "Do not be too hard on her, babe," she purred, her high-pitched voice dripping with incredibly fake pity. "It must be exceptionally difficult for her to accept that she could never provide for you the way my powerful family can. We just want a very clean break today. Just sign the property deed over to us. Take whatever meager, pathetic savings you have managed to scrape together and move into a small rental apartment. It is honestly the absolute least you can do after holding him back for so incredibly long." My mother nodded enthusiastically, taking a quick sip of her sparkling wine. "Do the right thing for once in your life, Stella. Your older sister Rachel and her highly successful husband Andre never caused this kind of utterly embarrassing public drama. Just sign the legal papers right now and leave us to celebrate in peace." I did not cry. I did not scream or beg for their approval. I simply reached into my black leather purse, pulled out my favorite fountain pen, and flipped directly to the very last page of the heavy property release. I signed my full name with a smooth, deliberate flourish and slid the thick stack of papers across the long dining table. Liam snatched the legal documents eagerly, his eyes lighting up with unbridled, selfish greed. "Enjoy the house," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. I picked up my mobile phone, unlocked the digital screen, and dialed a highly specific number. I placed the phone right on the center of the table and turned on the loudspeaker. The crisp, professional voice of a senior bank representative answered almost immediately. "Hello, this is Vanguard Financial. How can I help you today?" "Yes," I replied calmly, leaning back in my chair. "This is Stella. I am calling to officially revoke my status as the primary financial guarantor on the Seattle residential property located on Mercer Island. The divorce is now fully finalized, and the property has been fully transferred to my former husband, Liam." "Understood," the representative said, keyboard keys clacking loudly in the background. "Guarantee status is officially revoked. We will immediately transfer the heavy financial burden of the $500,000 second mortgage solely to the new primary owner of the estate." The color instantly drained from the face of Liam. He dropped his silver fork. Sienna stopped smiling, her gaze snapping toward Liam in absolute confusion. "Second mortgage," Sienna demanded, her voice losing all its sweet, breathy charm. "What second mortgage?" I picked up my glass of wine, swirling the dark liquid slowly before taking a deliberate sip. "Liam did not tell you," I asked, feigning innocent surprise. "That massive diamond ring you are wearing right now was not bought with Astor family money. Liam took out a $500,000 second mortgage on our shared home to purchase it. Since I just signed away my rights to the property, the debt is yours now. Congratulations on your engagement, Sienna. I hope you enjoy paying off your own ring for the next 30 years. Liam slammed his hands hard on the table. "You vindictive witch," he snarled loudly. "You think this matters at all? I will cancel your insurance." "Cancel the insurance, Liam," I softly said, smiling. "But check who truly pays your clinic bills."
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines, And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my Father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my Father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love.